Please give it up for the session all about play to win, the business of esports, with Delane Parnel from the 313 and Morgan Debaun from the 314.
What's up, Afrotech?
Hey, what up, fam?
Did anybody's arms start hurting while they were watching that? Okay. All right, Delane, how are you?
Good, I'm great.
You recovered from that party
It's a beautiful
last night?
room right here.
It is a beautiful room. So first, let's just talk about what is esports? You know, I think a lot of people have maybe heard the phrase esports, but we might not know what it is. So why don't you tell people what it means?
So how many people here, by show of hands, have ever heard of esports before? All right, cool. So for most of you, you have a good understanding of exactly what it means. For those who don't, esports is really a term used to describe competitive video gaming. So playing video games in the same format and structure as sports. Mm-hmm. And so there's an entire industry built around it. Professional leagues that look like the NBA, the NFL, lots of the team owners in those professional leagues are the same owners who own franchises in the NFL, NBA. And like we're working on the amateur side of that.
Right, so when you say amateur side, what does that mean?
99.9% of gamers, right? So of the 1,000 pro players, there's 2.4 billion amateur players who enjoy playing video games, and we're building software that enables competition for them.
Mm-hmm. So you recently closed your Series C. Let's
Yeah.
do a big shout out to that. Not many of us have made it to Series C yet. I do not envy that level of pressure.
No, for real.
So you've raised a little under 95 million.
No, 96 million.
96. I was there. Don't forget a million now.
Hey, man.
96 million in under
13 months.
13 months. The company's 18 months old?
21.
Tell me about that experience. Tell me about how you got started and what your journey has been to get to where you are today.
So I started the company last January, really around the mission of building out the infrastructure around amateur esports. So what that means is if you're going to play esports and you're not going to be a professional, you're going to play online. And so who's going to own the generational product where all of that competition happens? And so we went out to build that company. The way that we approached it is really unique, mostly because we have to even have a company, we have to work with game publishers who own their IP. So in many ways, it's the same challenge that groups like Spotify or Netflix have, where they have to go work with third parties who spend billions of dollars developing IP, and you have to acquire the rights to be able to like commercialize that. And so to be able to accomplish that, we decided to take a really unique approach into how we enter the market, and end up basically owning and operating high school esports. So we went to this group called the NFHS, who governs all high schools in the country, essentially the same as the NCAA, in the same office for the past 100 years. And we received a partnership with them to own and operate esports at 20,000 high schools across the country. So having that distribution allowed us to go out. Thank you. Yeah. So having that distribution allowed us to go out, acquire the rights from publishers, build a team that built, product, and then essentially started to, raise money on the back of that idea. And so, last May, we raised our Series A, $15.5 million, which just a few months after launching, and then a few months later, raised our Series B, $30.5 million, and then a couple months ago, we closed our Series C, $50 million.
What is all this money for? How are you going to deploy this capital? What is the return on investment? I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, so we know that you need a lot of money to go after it. So what are you going to do?
Sure. Yeah. So look, the opportunity in front of us, at least based on our assumption and all of the research that we've done, is that we're building a 100 million plus user subscription business, right? So we're building the biggest company in gaming, biggest company, certainly the most impactful, most valuable company in esports. And we need people, right, to get there. And people in LA specifically are really expensive. And so, as you know all too well. And so look, we're using that money to build more product, to invest in our community. It's a new category. So there's certainly going to be some bumpy roads within the sort of, bubble that's being created. and we want to be around. And so we haven't spent most of that money, but we're certainly looking forward to continuing to invest in our people. And we're launching some new stuff next year. So today we're in high school, and a third of the country has adopted eSports, right? Video games as a sanctioned sport in high school, which is pretty crazy. Next year we're going to be
Can you just explain that? Because I'm not sure that everybody fully gets it. What does it mean to be a sanctioned sport in high school? You've got people with like varsity esports, right?
Yeah, no, it's pretty wild. So if you go to high school and you play a sport, you can win a state championship for it. The fact that you can win that state championship means that the sport has been sanctioned. We partner with this group in all of these states for them to adopt video games as a sanctioned sport. I mean, kids who go to certain schools, like in California, for example, they can play a game like League of Legends or, maybe in the future NBA 2K for a state championship, as the kids in basketball or football or soccer today does. They can earn a varsity letter. They can be eligible for the, State Hall of Fame and the state record books. They can receive, millions of dollars in scholarship because, hundreds of colleges offer tens of millions of dollars in scholarships. And so, we've created an entire environment for kids who care about video games and want to be recognized for their talents there to be able to go out and take their career to the next level.
That's awesome. Yeah. Don't be shy, Afrote. Don't be shy. This is a lot of work. Yeah. So let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to Detroit. So you're from Detroit. You're a serial entrepreneur.
Yeah.
We got Detroit in the building, just in the front. Okay. So you're a serial entrepreneur. You've been hustling almost all your life.
Yep.
What made you decide to take it to the next level and go after the Silicon Valley money?
Yeah, no, look, what's the alternative, right, is the real question. So, I grew up, born and raised in Detroit, Jeffries Projects, spent the sort of second half of my life as a teenager on the west side of Detroit, raised by a single mother, myself and my older brother. And my mom, she did some stuff that was pretty impactful, like early on into my career. Looking back, especially now, she got us summer jobs. I worked at this cell phone store, and my brother ended up working at this meat packing place called Meat Town, and now he works as a chef. And obviously, I work in business. And so this guy at this cell phone store named Sam, he took me under his wing, allowed me the opportunity to basically be able to learn and experiment as I went. And eventually I ended up owning some cell phone stores in high school, started a car rental, ended up working in venture capital, worked at a startup that raised a bunch of money. How old were you? When I was working in venture, I was like 20, 21. Right, early. Yeah, no, so it was super early. There was like that's when, it's interesting. People would tell me like, hey, you need an MBA. And I was like, man, maybe for you, I was like, what's an MBA? Like, I dropped out of school. I went to school for a semester. I was like, man, nobody getting money here. I was like, I got to get out of here. No, for real. So I left school and I was like, I'm gonna figure it out. Like for me to go, my mom has like all of these old videos of me when I was a kid. People would be like, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? And I would always respond like, I want to be a billionaire, like, or I'm going to be a billionaire. And I never really knew exactly how I'd get there. I always had the conviction that I would, and luckily, I was able to find an avenue through gaming, which is something I care a lot about, tech, which is something I care a lot about. And, for me, like, I want to be the first African-American to sell a tech company for $1 billion, and I think we're well on our way. So, I'm happy about that.
So a lot of times, I want to talk about this. I feel like we've talked about this before. A lot of times, I think in the black tech space, because there's so few of us who raise venture funding, we celebrate the raise.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be kind of a false sense of success because that's fake. That's just numbers on a piece of paper, right? It's not liquid. So what is your point of view on kind of the state of black startups, black tech? Do you think that we've made progress? Do you think that we're approaching it the right way? Just what are your general thoughts about where we are today?
Yeah, well, first off, I think, lots of companies are investing into, fixing whatever said pipeline issue that they have. And I think while I don't think that there's a pipeline issue just from having exposure to being in those rooms, it's really for them an awareness issue and an exposure issue. I went down to Atlanta with a really well-known angel investor who's invested into companies that have sold for tens of billions of dollars, and he'd never been to Atlanta. He had no ever intentions of ever going to Atlanta. And the one time I asked him, he was so curious, he decided to like get on a plane and come down. And I'd imagine that that's the case for lots of investors, who invest tons of capital into companies. It's mostly like into people who look like them because that's like that's the exposure that they have, right? Those are the relationships that they have within their network. And so, I think what we need to really spend a lot of time talking about, and I talk about this quite often, is that certainly like we need to continue to put pressure on investors to put money into Black companies, and I do that very often. In fact, like I was invited to some big like CEO exclusive conference earlier this year, and I told them, they sent me this invite, and it was an honor, obviously, but I responded and I said, hey, look, I looked at the list of people, there's no Black people besides me, like if you can invite these 10 people, like I'm happy to come, otherwise like I don't want to be there. I think the people in those positions need to do more of that and like continue to put pressure on, thank you. Yeah, look, I think we need to continue to put pressure on people with the resources, right, to open up doors for our people and invest in our ideas. I also think we need to invest in our people's ideas, right, in our own community, right? Like we have our own resources. We have to be willing to take risks in each other and willing to build up our own community, right, and take ownership in that. Secondly, because not everyone's an entrepreneur, I think we need to really start, obviously people should go to school and certainly focus on engineering or product-related roles. I think there's a lot of opportunity to build generational wealth in being an engineer or being a product manager or even a project manager at a company. But I also think that we need to encourage our people to go work in HR, right? I think HR is the perfect opportunity to be able to go out and hire the next set of executives and train the next set of executives. And I think if there were more people who look like us in some of these big companies in HR roles, especially like HR leadership roles, you'll see more people within these companies that look like us. And so I think between those three things, you're seeing a little bit of it now, like we're in the early stages of development there, but certainly a long way to go. And I think that's a good roadmap to getting there.
Yeah. So thinking about kind of your journey to date, you've got some rock star investors. What has been your process for fundraising? Detroit doesn't necessarily have a ton of people who are in venture capital. There are a couple of people who've made a significant amount of investments there, but the number is small, but their amount is big. They're very rich. So what was your process? How did you get started with your first check?
Yeah, so I had to leave Detroit, by the way, to get my first check. It's interesting to be this kid from Detroit, really in all of the right networks, when there's really, in Detroit, there's like only one network, right? Dan Gilbert, he like owns the entire city. He owns the biggest companies in the city, but I'm within the network, right? We have a relationship personally. I had this idea and I wanted to start this company. I went to meet with his team the week before I was scheduled to leave. And I was like, hey, look, I got this idea. We obviously have a relationship. Do you guys want to support it? And the guy whose job is to keep people, like talented people in the city, told me, like, no, you should go and do that.
Why did you think he said that?
I mean, look, they typically invest in white Jewish men, right? Like within their community. And while I have like great respect for that, like that's what they do, right? And so, frankly, I don't think he had faith. Like, I think that's super clear. And he certainly didn't see the vision. And so, it's interesting. I go back now. I was just there for the Forbes conference, and everybody knew I was going to be a great success. They're like, man, I knew. I'm so.
Of course.
The fakest love in the world is like when they come up to you, you try to work with somebody, they're like, I'm so proud of you. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? But I met this guy named Peter Pham at South by Southwest. And Peter's super important in my journey because, he spoke with me for 30 minutes, thought the idea that I was thinking about was super compelling and said, hey, give me your phone number. Let's talk about this. And he followed up. Like, I didn't have to reach out to him. He followed up the next day and said, hey, I've been thinking a lot about what you've been thinking, what you talked about, and here's how I think we can approach it. And asked me to come to LA and spend time with him and his partners, and so I did. So one, I talked to him. I was not afraid to share my idea with him. And I think a lot of us, we're so possessive of our ideas, we're afraid to get our ideas out in the universe. Like, you got to share it. That's the only way. Like, first off, it's such an arrogant mentality to be like, I don't want to share my idea. Like, we all have ideas. No one's going to steal your idea. Right. The only thing that can really happen is like you'll have conversation and people will help you evolve and enhance the idea. right? And so like that's the first thing I did there. I think that like is a strong lesson. And beyond that, like when Peter followed up, I jumped at the opportunity. So he's like, hey, come to LA. I was like on the next plane to LA. And I recognize not everyone has the financial resources to do that, but if you do, like you should take those opportunities and don't really worry about what's on the other side of that. And so I went out there, I spent time with him, and there was still, some time where, I was like on the fence about it because I was like, I'm from Detroit, I like to do this in Detroit. But there was nobody there really willing to support me. And even then, I was still pretty committed to the city. But Peter called me, and he said something I'll never forget. He's like, look, you can be a millionaire in Detroit or a billionaire in LA. Like, you get to choose. Right. He's like, but like, you give me 24 hours, like, don't waste my time, And I called him the next day. I was like, man, I done gave everything away. Like, I'm on my way. And I jumped there, and I went out to LA. And basically worked on the idea for like 6 months, really like talking to people, sharing the idea, making relationships, figuring out the fundamentals of the idea to actually go out and establish a company. So I spent 6 months working on it before we'd ever started the company. And that was just me in a tiny room figuring it out. There was times where I couldn't articulate it, times where I didn't even think like we'd be successful, but I just every single day stayed focused. And I wrote out like 3 objectives too. I said, hey, if I can acquire publisher relationships, acquire distribution, and build a strong product, like I can build a company. And so I would always focus on those 3 things, because I think in the early days, if you don't like set a North Star, it's a lot of distractions out there. So you end up not being productive in how you approach work. And so, I think it's super like important to do that. And I wrote those 3 things down early on, and I stayed focused on those 3 things. And eventually, like the, pieces of the puzzle started to come together. And so, we went out and raised our first round, and I think in April, and our story is super privileged. Like, we did 4 meetings. We're really strategic about how we approached it. We only met Thursday and Friday, because the objective is to get to a partners meeting on Monday. And so if you meet too early in the week, there's a chance where the whole thing falls apart. And so, we did Thursday and Friday, did a bunch of partners meetings Monday, luckily, and then we announced our company publicly on like Tuesday. So we're like really strategic about it. And when we announced it publicly, hundreds of publications started to write about us. And so now all of the investors we just met with the day before, who are mulling over if they want to make a decision, they're seeing all of the excitement around the business. Tons of other investors, want to meet with us. And so we take another set of Thursday and Friday. We started to get all of these offer letters, and then we just like quickly made a decision on who we wanted to work with. And so the next couple rounds were like pretty easy as well, like very quick for us. So I don't know if that's super helpful for anyone here, but yeah, like I think it's just every story is a lot different in fundraising. I think the one thing that people talk about, like our investors talk about, that I think is helpful is like, I walked into that room with a ton of confidence. Like when they would ask me, first off, like as Black entrepreneurs, like even when I was an investor, one thing I always realized is that like we're willing to share all of the details. Like we'll tell you anything you ask for. Like investors don't have truth serum like attached to you. Like you have the opportunity to say what you want to disclose and what you don't want to disclose. Like an investor's job is to like meet you, learn as much as they can because they're taking notes, and then they're going to track you over time, right? And if you're progressing, they're going to be like really aggressive in trying to write a check, and if you're not, they're going to refer back to their notes, and then like they're going to like check back in at some time afterwards. And so I always take the approach of if I'm not fundraising, I'm not building relationships with investors, and then 2, nothing kills a raise better than numbers and time, right? And so like if you're saying you're going to hit some numbers, and over some time you don't do that, or if you're saying you're raising, but a year later someone sees you again and you're still raising, like the raise is dead, so like it's time to get back to work and find an alternative. But look, venture dollars also aren't the only way to build a company. Like there's tons of ways to do so. And to Morgan's earlier point, like when you raise capital, it's not like the end all be all. Like we have a ton of work to do. I like to say it's like having resources to buy a plot of land, but we still have to build the house, right? And then sell the house. And so we have a mortgage essentially, but investors want a return on their capital, and we're committed to give them one. But just know that pressure is real.
Yeah, absolutely. So momentum is key. Let's talk about your team. So you raised all this money. You guys are growing incredibly fast. How are you structuring your team? How are you organizing your time as a CEO? You're on the road constantly. Yeah. I know you're very careful about what you do and not do and how you manage your time. So talk us through a little bit, because again, there's very few people at your level in our generation. So how do you manage your time today?
Yeah, so I say no to as much as many things as possible. Hanging out with some celebrity, no. Like,
Unless it's Diddy.
Diddy is my man. Like that's a different thing. But there's been times too where I've like had to take the back seat because I'm like, look, I just got stuff to do. But no, if the opportunity, comes along, I'm trying to be in the car, But no, look, but seriously though, saying no to opportunities to hang out with people, to go to parties, to do dinners and meetings or whatever it is, you have to learn how to say no. That also applies to family. It's super important to just be focused on your time and to prioritize what's in front of you from a team perspective and then the personal perspective. You got to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And so saying no to as much stuff as possible is one thing that I practice. And people get mad about it, but you just have to do that if you want to be successful. From a team perspective, I love my team. I think I have an incredible collection of people. It's one of the most diverse companies you'll walk into ever. Gender, ethnicity, background, so many beautiful shades of people, and they're all really experienced. They've helped build companies. They all have different backgrounds. And I'm super fortunate for that. The one thing that'll make a company be successful is team. The idea literally does not matter because the idea evolves too, right? And it changes over time. And it changes based on the people that you work with and you hire. And so finding the best team possible is super important. And the one thing that, I always focused on, especially because we raised so much money, was now I have the resources to swing, basically in the different weight class. So I went out and hired the best executives. I was hiring executives whose opportunity was come join this really small startup with 5 people or go be an executive at Bird when they were, just raised $1 billion. But, I had a lot of confidence. I had a really strong vision. And I was just on their phone every day. Hey, look, let's talk about this more. Tell me what issues, you have. What are you contemplating on this? Just trying to work through their problems to convince them to come over. And we ended up hiring some really incredible people. One of our guys is Robert Lamvick, who is the VP. He was the head of growth at Spotify and Headspace. His team grew Spotify while he was there through 30 million subs from basically nothing, and then through 70 million subs after he left through his strategy and vision. And then he left to go to Headspace and grew them to 100 million in revenue. And he joined super early, before we'd done any sort of acquisition. We had no acquisition strategy. It was all organic growth. And in fact, it's so insane. We paid a recruiter $115,000 just to identify a list of people and try to help us go out to recruit them.
Nuts.
He was the number one person on the list, but he wouldn't take the call.
Wow.
But we went to go hire this CTO who was actually on the Beats leadership team and on the Headspace leadership team, and he joined. And as soon as he joined, Robert would take his call because they worked together. And then, a couple weeks later, he was at the company. But, we definitely lost that $115,000. So being a recruiter, again, being in HR is a good business. There's a lot of money to be made there,
Right.
And it actually doesn't take much effort. It's just find people, get them to talk to this company, and then you take 30% of their salary. It's super easy.
Right.
But yeah, look, team, hire really strong people. Don't prioritize hiring friends. Hire the best person for the job, and don't worry about domain experience. So for us, we're focused on esports. So we don't need people who understand esports. We need people who have incredible depth at whatever their job is. So if you're a CFO, I want you to be the best CFO possible based on that skill set, and then I want you to be an incredible leader, right? So leadership ability and skill, and then depth in your experience and your domain, I think is most important than actual market experience.
So we have about 6 minutes left. So I want to get some tangible advice. You've given some great advice about folks who already have startups and how they can approach the raising process. What about people who are considering getting into startup world? How many of you all have a day job but may want to be an entrepreneur? Yeah, so what are your thoughts on people who may have because you're here, you got a good paying job, so you're doing well, but do you really want to be broke like the rest of us for some time? So that's the risk. What is your advice to people who are thinking about taking that leap of faith and starting their own company and following their dreams?
Yeah, so look, my first piece of advice is before you become an entrepreneur, come work at PlayVs. So that's the first piece of advice, right? I think especially if it's a tech company, you want to be at a company that was really small, that went really big, and you want to be a part of that experience, right? Because going through that journey will prepare you to actually be an entrepreneur. I had that journey right before I started PlayVs. I was an early employee at this company called Rocket Fiber. we raised 31 million from Dan Gilbert, and so we were like the largest raise in Michigan history at the time, and we were just like a couple kids who knew nothing about what we were doing, and we built this incredible company, right? And so I learned so much through that process, and I got to work hands-on directly with our CEO, and had I not had that experience, I would never have been able to be successful at PlayVs, especially like this fast, and this early. And so, look, I think that's like the first piece of advice I would give you. I know everyone's really excited to jump out there and start companies, but definitely go and learn and study before you do so. And then when you're committed to doing so, like, do it, right? Like, you can start by working at whatever company you're working at, as long as it's not PlayVs, and be working like on the project on the side, right, after work, on weekends, and really commit to it, get something built, get it out and market, test it, continue to iterate, and then like jump and like, quit your job full time and like focus on it. But like whatever you do, if you take that approach or you just jump straight out the window, like make sure you're like committed to it, and like you focus your time like while you're working on it.
So any final advice for the Afrotech community before we depart?
Any final advice?
Yeah, any final words?
Yo, we just, look, man, we deserve, I think that a lot of people, we always are like asking to be in a room or asking for a seat at the table. Like, look, we deserve not only to be at those tables, to own those rooms. And so I think, as you guys are all in here, first off, it's incredible to see so many people committed on a Saturday to be here to learn, to meet people. I think this is a beautiful thing. And this is already, one step ahead of whoever is talking about doing something but actually haven't started. And so you guys should really be all like just proud of yourself, frankly, for like being here and committing that time. But in general, like, we just have to prioritize ownership. Like, we have to own stuff, whether that's our homes. To be honest, I don't know if owning a car makes sense, but like certainly homes, you gotta like have equity in businesses and yourself, and you have to really care about that. And also we have to support each other. Jay-Z had this rap, and if anyone hasn't heard it, like they should go listen to it. And it was like at one of his concerts, when like after Nipsey Hussle passed, and he talked about how like what most people don't recognize in like a crab in a barrel mentality is like if the crab holds on to each other as they like are on their way out the barrel, the first one that gets out, as long as everyone stays attached, everyone will get out. But instead, one crab is trying to pull each other down basically as soon as someone makes progress. Like we can't be on that wave anymore. Like we can't hate on each other. We have to support each other. If we say we're going to do something for each other, we have to actually follow through with that. And we have to hold each other accountable like when we aren't doing that. And so I think that's an important lesson that I found is super helpful in my life, and I try to prioritize that. And just that mentality in general. Like I never want to be the only black person in the rooms that I'm in. I say no to stuff if I'm the only black person in the rooms that I'm in. And like, if you get to that level, or even if the room is a small room, like you got to bring people who look like you in there, people who want to be in that room. And then like y'all got to just put in the work, and stay focused, and then open the door for the next generation of people who also want to be there.
Well, thank you, Delane. Yeah, shout out to that. We appreciate you.
Of course, yeah.
We celebrate you. Congratulations again.
To you. Come on.
This is a big moment. So thank you all. Please keep your seats because we're going to go straight to the next speaker.